Imagine a playground. Laughter, shouts, the buzzing energy of kids playing. But there's a quiet spot, often at the edge. And in that spot, you are not necessarily sad, not always angry, just observing, watching the games you're not part of, hearing the conversations you're not in. This isn't the loneliness of being grounded or told to go to your room. This is the loneliness of being present yet invisible, of wanting to join but not knowing how, or feeling like every attempt leads to a silent wall. You tell yourself, I'm fine alone, or their games are silly anyway, but deep down, there's a whisper, a quiet ache for connection that never quite goes away. The world might see you as shy, quiet, or just different, but no one asks, what does it cost you to stand on the sidelines? This is the unseen psychology of a child without friends, where longing, observation, and unspoken attempts become the silent building blocks of your world. Share this with someone who used to be that quiet kid, the one who never got chosen. The playground is supposed to be your social world. For a child without friends, the playground can feel like shifting ground. You stop feeling at home in social groups and start feeling hyper-aware everywhere. Because suddenly, you're not just a child playing. You become a constant analyzer, scanning for cues, trying to decipher unspoken rules, bracing for potential rejection. This hypervigilance doesn't feel like fear to you. It feels like survival. You learn to read the room before you even walk in, as if safety depends on predicting who will notice you. You learn which groups are safe to approach and which will likely ignore you. You learn that your feelings of wanting to play are less important than avoiding embarrassment. And then comes the constant internal question no child should ever have to answer. What's wrong with me? It's not a thought. It's a wound. Every attempt to connect that falls flat feels like betrayal. Every group activity where you're the last picked or not picked at all feels like evidence you don't belong. So you learn neutrality. You learn to be the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who doesn't rock the social boat. And slowly, your childhood becomes less about freely exploring play and more about managing perceived social threats. You learn early that connection can be elusive. So as an adult, you might overgive, overcommit, or fear being too much in relationships, desperate to be chosen. You carry the memory that belonging can be conditional, that one day everyone is playing, and the next, you're on the outside looking in. So even in safe relationships as an adult, part of you stays packed, ready to retreat before being rejected. You can develop what psychologists call anxious attachment or avoidant attachment. Not because you're clingy or cold, but because your nervous system learned that closeness equals potential instability or pain. You also develop a rich inner world. With no external playmates, your imagination becomes your primary companion. The result? An adult who is deeply creative, introspective, but might struggle to know who they truly are when they're finally with others. You've spent so long adapting to solitude, performing the version of yourself that causes no trouble, that you forgot what you actually want in a friendship, what genuine connection feels like. And then there's the self-blame, the hidden, relentless question. Is it my fault? Nobody told you it was your fault, but the mind of a child doesn't work that way. Children often assume they're the center of everything. So when their social world falls apart, you think, maybe if I had been funnier, maybe if I hadn't been so quiet, maybe if I had just been easier to like. That self-blame doesn't disappear when you grow up. It just changes shape. It becomes perfectionism. It becomes people-pleasing. It becomes the belief that you have to earn friendship through performance, through being useful, through never needing anything. In The Body Keeps the Score, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains how childhood trauma, including social exclusion, can rewire the brain for survival. Your nervous system learns to scan for social threats, to anticipate rejection, to brace for isolation. Even when you're safe, you don't always feel safe in groups. Raised on the sidelines, you often become allergic to confrontation or even just initiation. Peacekeeping becomes your second language. Silence becomes your defense. Because you learned early that reaching out doesn't always lead to inclusion, it can lead to rejection or awkwardness. So you avoid it. You swallow your words. You don't suggest games. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You'd rather disappear than risk being ignored or laughed at. And in adult relationships, this creates a painful pattern. You attract people who need you to be calm, stable, undemanding. People who benefit from your silence because you've been trained to believe that your needs cause problems, that speaking up means losing potential connection. Psychologists call this conflict avoidance and learned social helplessness. But it's not just avoidance, it's a survival mechanism built in childhood. You watch friendships form and dissolve, often feeling like an outsider. So you learned, if I never truly try, maybe I'll never truly lose anyone. But the cost is high, because avoiding initiation means avoiding honesty. And avoiding honesty means never being fully known. You end up in relationships where you're liked for who you pretend to be, not for who you actually are. And that, more than anything, feels like the loneliest kind of connection. Share this if you've ever stayed silent to keep the peace or avoid perceived rejection. Send this to the friend who truly understands your quiet depths, the one who sees the real you. The child without friends doesn't just survive social exclusion, you internalize it. And those childhood adaptations become lifelong patterns. Maybe you became the overfunctioner, the one who tries to buy friendship through favors, gifts, or endless support, who never feels safe resting because rest feels like being forgotten. You're the friend everyone leans on, the partner who anticipates every need, the employee who works until burnout. Because somewhere deep inside you still believe, if I can just do enough, if I can just be useful enough, someone will choose me. Or maybe you became the emotional avoider. You fear emotional intimacy because closeness once meant vulnerability to rejection. You keep people at arm's length, not because you don't care, but because caring has cost you too much pain. Distance feels safer than dependency. Independence feels stronger than vulnerability. So you build walls and call it self-protection. But really, you're just doing what you learned as a child, managing proximity to social pain. Or maybe you became the approval seeker. You spend adulthood trying to earn the belonging that should have been unconditional. Success becomes your apology for being different or unpopular. Every achievement is proof that you deserve to exist and be liked. You climb higher, work harder, achieve more. But no matter how much you accomplish, the voice inside still whispers, am I enough now? Can you like me now? And here's the core truth that connects all these patterns. Your nervous system learned that belonging equals tension or performance, and connection equals potential pain. So you became an adult who can't rest in relationships, who can't trust that people will stay, who believes somewhere deep down that you're always one mistake away from being alone again. In Attached by Dr. Amir Levine, he explains that children with early social difficulties often develop insecure attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, or a painful combination of both. Not because you're broken, but because your earliest model of social interaction taught you that connection is hard to find and easy to lose. Let me tell you something nobody talks about. The child without friends carries a specific kind of loneliness. Not loneliness for something you did. Loneliness for something you couldn't control, like how to fit in. You weren't just a witness to others' friendships. In your mind, you were somehow responsible for your own exclusion. Maybe you heard kids whisper and you thought it was about you. Maybe you tried to join a game and felt clumsy or out of place. So, your child brain connected the dots. If I had been different, more fun, more like them, maybe they would have wanted me. And that belief, it doesn't just fade when you grow up. It becomes the foundation of how you seek and keep friendships. You become someone who apologizes for existing, who minimizes their needs, who gives until there's nothing left, because maybe, just maybe, if you're useful enough, you won't be forgotten. This is what psychologists call maladaptive self-blame, or internalized rejection blame. That was never yours to carry, but you've been carrying it so long it feels like part of your identity. In Running on Empty by Dr. Jonas Webb, she explains that children who grow up feeling responsible for social failures develop emotional neglect. Not because no one loved them, but because no one protected you from the burden of feeling unchosen. And that burden becomes a backpack you never put down. Even now, as an adult, you feel guilty for wanting things, for having needs, for taking up space. Because somewhere inside, the child in you still believes, if I had been less, maybe they would have liked me. Comment not my fault if you're ready to put down the blame that was never yours to carry. Now let's talk about healing. Healing doesn't mean resenting those who had friends. It means naming the pain that was never allowed. It means finally saying the things the child in you needed to hear. It wasn't your job to make everyone like you. You were a child. You were allowed to be different. Their choosing others wasn't proof that you were unlikable. Healing begins when you stop being both the judge and the judged, and finally allow yourself to just be yourself. One of the most powerful therapeutic practices is called inner child work. It's the process of going back to that child on the sidelines, watching the playground, and offering them what no one else did: comfort, validation, permission to be scared, and to be exactly who you are. You learn to rebuild trust not just in others, but in yourself. You learn that social bumps don't always mean rejection, that friendship doesn't have to be earned through performance. You learn that you can speak up without everything falling apart. In the drama of The Gifted Child, Alice Miller writes that healing happens when we stop performing the version of ourselves that kept us safe and start becoming the version of ourselves that's real. That means setting boundaries with people who expect you to constantly overgive. That means choosing friends who don't punish you for having needs. That means learning to rest without guilt, to need without shame, to exist without performing. And yes, this work is hard, because it requires you to feel everything you weren't allowed to feel as a child. The anger at exclusion, the grief of lost connection, the loneliness of being the only one holding things together for yourself. But on the other side of that feeling is something you've been searching for your whole life: wholeness and genuine connection. The path to healing has stages, and the first is acknowledgement, not blame. You don't have to resent those who had friends to heal from what social exclusion cost you. You can understand that other children were just being children and still honor your own pain. The second stage is learning to trust again, not blindly, but wisely. You learn that safe people exist, that some relationships don't end in silent withdrawal, that you can be liked even when you're not useful or perfect. You start choosing differently. You stop gravitating toward familiar patterns of isolation. You start choosing vulnerability, even when it feels foreign. The third stage is reparenting yourself. This means giving yourself what your peers couldn't: consistency, emotional safety, permission to need without apology. It means telling yourself, I don't have to be the funniest or the most popular to be worthy of friendship. Through therapy, through journaling, through boundaries, you learn to stop carrying everyone else's emotional weight. And you start asking yourself a question you've never asked before. What did I lose on that playground, and what parts of me am I ready to bring home again? Maybe it's your voice, the one that learned to stay quiet. Maybe it's your needs, the ones you learned to hide. Maybe it's your right to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to not have everything figured out. You begin to understand not having friends wasn't your fault, but healing is your responsibility and your right. Hit like if you believe children who experience loneliness can build whole, connected lives. You need to recognize the patterns. See the perfectionism, the fear of rejection, the overgiving not as personality traits, but as survival responses. These weren't choices, they were adaptations. Your nervous system did what it had to do to keep you safe in an environment that felt socially unstable or threatening. But you're not in that environment anymore. You don't need to hold yourself apart. You get to build a social world of your own, safe, stable, and real. You get to choose friendships where you're not the performer, where you're not the emotional manager, where you can be imperfect and still be liked. You get to rest without guilt, to need without shame, to take up space without apologizing for it. And maybe, for the first time in your life, you get to feel truly seen and at home in yourself. Because a quiet childhood may have shaped you, but it doesn't have to define you. Healing begins when you stop managing everyone else's perceptions and start honoring your own truth. It begins when you tell that child on the sidelines, it's not your fault they didn't choose you. It's not your job to make people like you, and you don't have to earn your place in this world. You were always enough. You just needed someone to see it. And now, finally, you do. If this video changed something in you, tell me in the comments which part hit hardest. Subscribe if you believe children who experience loneliness deserve to heal and thrive. Let's build a community of people who refuse to let quiet childhoods silence them forever. You're not broken, you're not too much, and you're not alone. The connections you build for yourself, they're going to be real, and you're going to be okay.